that's kind of what got me into events and festivals. I just saw the power of art to bring people together and to really promote cultural diversity and connect people.
Hello, print friends, and welcome. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. This is a bilingual podcast, so if you subscribe to us, you'll be getting episodes in English with me, as well as in Spanish with Ronaldo Gil Zambrano. Together, we speak to people from around the globe about their practice and passions in the field of print media and multiples. Hello, Print Friend is brought to you by Speedball Art Products. In 1915, Ross F. George published the first edition of the Speedball textbook, which quickly became the superlative resource for artists and letterers of all ages and skills. This is a great resource for the gig poster gang or folks who want to develop their own fonts and letter forms for screen and relief printed work. The new 25th edition of the Speedball textbook has a convenient lay-flat construction and 120 pages of examples, contributors' works, and innovative technical insights that is sure to inspire and appeal to scribes and enthusiasts across the spectrum of skill and experience. There's a link in the show notes. This episode is also brought to you by Legion Paper. Legion is a fine art paper company representing the best papers in the world. They either stock it, source it, or make it. With brands like Stonehenge, Somerset, Coventry, Reeves, Arches, and more, Legion is the best paper resource for every artist and printmaker's needs. Learn more about the variety of paper Legion stocks at www.legionpaper.com. My guest this week is Ina Arraoui. We talk about growing up on a small, back-to-land community in northern New Zealand, her dramatic escape from Italy on one of the last flights out of the country during the early days of the pandemic, the incredible printmaking festival she's founded called PRINTOPIA, how Auckland doesn't have an open access printmaking studio, and what she's planning to do about it. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to get festive with Ina Arraoui. Hi Ina, how's it going?
I'm great, Miranda. How are you?
I'm really good. I am so happy to connect with you. I just love meeting other people in the print world in general, but particularly those who are trying to kind of do what I'm trying to do, which is get the word out, build some things. You and I have the dubious and prestigious honor of hosting print festivals and everything that goes into that. So we share that in common, and I'm just delighted to get to know you better and hear more about what you've been up to.
Yes, it's my pleasure. I'm very excited to be here today.
So before we get into all of that juicy, deep stuff, let's do the who you are, where you are, what you do questions.
Okay, I'm Ina Arraoui. I'm a print artist and I organise an annual printmaking festival in Auckland, New Zealand called PRINTOPIA Festival of Original Print. Yeah.
All right.
That's the majority of what I do. I do a lot of other
Beautiful.
things. But that's, I think, what's most important today.
Absolutely. And then where did you grow up and what was art like in that part of your life in the early landscape of Ina?
So I grew up in a small rural community in the far north called Fern Flat, which is pretty much a valley where a lot of alternative lifestyle type people live. And when I was growing up, a lot of my friends' parents had migrated there in the 70s during the hippie movement. And so there were a lot of creatives. There were potters and musicians and weavers and furniture makers, and like everybody designed and built their own house. And it was a very, very creative scene. And my mom, who's originally from California, was and still is a fabric artist. And she had this huge studio called the Sewing Room, where I spent a lot of my childhood in there making things and being surrounded by all of her beautiful fabric art. And she would sew scarves and purses, and she would hand make shoes from fabric with embroider and tie-dye and batik shoes. And I remember her cutting out and cutting out the leather for it and the smell of the glue and hammering down the sole of the
Mm-hmm.
and she would like go to the local market and sell her work there. And so art was very much a part of my upbringing. And our primary school was very arts focused. It had this curriculum which believed in fostering children's creativity, with art not just being a subject, but it's a way of learning. So like I remember turning up at school one day and the teacher said, right, it's autumn. Go outside and just experience autumn. And then come back and write a haiku poem about it. So it was just like a very kind of freeing, expressive way of like primary school was, I didn't realize until much later as an adult how lucky I was to have a very kind of, they supported us to express ourselves creatively and verbally. And so it was really a really great upbringing. In fact, art was so much a part of everything that we did that I just assumed it was part of everybody's life. That's why I never thought to go and do art. I never studied art at university level because I just thought that's what everyone did, just like, but no, then I realized everyone plays sport.
Yeah. Absolutely. I know that a little bit, I think, just from growing up in, I don't think as much of sort of a hippie back to nature community as you, but Olympia, Washington is very progressive in that way, and not really a sports town, not really a town where people are maybe living a more mainstream life. And so people do go there to have something a little bit closer to nature and a little bit closer to the arts. And so I remember leaving home as well and realizing that, number one, not everyone's city was breathtakingly beautiful and being really confused by that. And then number two, just really understanding that I had that privilege and that special experience of getting the value of art never questioned and instead really wed into childhood. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so did this inspire you to study art or continue to be a maker as you moved on in school?
So in high school, I literally just lived in the art class, and that's where I did my first wood block. I remember carving my first wood block, which my mum still has it actually.
Amazing.
and,
I love that.
and we did a whole kind of like print series of different types of printmaking, but I just remember carving that block. And I think what got me hooked for life was it was the first time that I'd kind of experienced that flow state that artists get in. I guess even maybe sports people or people who are like really into something, they get into this wonderful flow state where time stands still. And it was the first time that I kind of achieved that, just being able to be really present and in the moment, really kind of meditative, kind of transcendent experience. And so I just have always done woodblock carving, but I never thought to go into university. One reason, I know why, because my sister was she's an amazing artist, and her whole process and approach to art was completely different to mine. But I thought, because I looked up to her as my older sister, I thought, well, that's a real artist and that's how you be an artist. And I'm not the same, so I can't be an artist. I must be.
Yeah.
And she really wanted to go to art school. That was her dream. And so I thought, well, she can be the artist in the family. And my passion was, actually, I loved architecture, but I had a horrible teacher. So then I decided, no, I'm not going to teach anymore. But we had an amazing collection of National Geographics. I think we had like the whole collection. And I remember looking through those as a child and thinking, wow, this is amazing. And this is an actual job. Oh my God, I want that job. So like, I was like, no, I'm going to go to university and I'm going to study cultural anthropologist. I'm going to be a cultural anthropologist, and that's my thing. And I ended up getting a master's in cultural anthropology. So I still love it, and it definitely influences the way I see the world, and definitely has a huge impact and influence on me today. And I don't regret it at all, but yeah, that was my kind of my trajectory rather than thinking about studying art, even though that's the only thing that I put an effort into at high school. I got like top of the school for photography. I love photography and printmaking because photography was about, well, we did black and white, and so it was about capturing the light and balancing light
Mm-hmm.
and dark, and carving the wood block was the same. You're carving out the light. And so I really like those two subjects, and geography. And otherwise, everything else I just didn't care about, and I just got A's for art and then C's for everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when did printmaking find its way back into your life? So you had this, I love that experience of the first flow state, because I feel like that's something that some people spend their whole lives chasing, is that little slice of ego death we get when our brain finally shuts off and we just get to create. And then you did the cultural anthropology path,
Yeah.
but printmaking must have worked its way back at some point for you to bring us here today.
Yes. I mean, even though I went to university and then got into like events and working for NGOs, I always did woodcuts. And
Hmm.
and then when I was living in Morocco, I went to the local Alliance Francaise and studied printmaking there. And in Tangier, went to the Spanish Institute, and they had a beautiful press and used that. So I've always kind of just done it just on the side, but just like when I needed to, when I had something I just needed to get out. I was like,
Hmm.
usually kind of a big world event possibly that I just kind of just needed to kind of meditate on, and so carve a block for that. Or just maybe an idea that I had inside that I just wanted to kind of think about more, and so I had to make it work about that. So I've always kind of done it, but it wasn't until about 2015 that so one of the kind of the top, well, one of the top woodcut artists in New Zealand is a guy called Michael Tuffery. And when I was
Hmm.
at high school doing my final year study, I literally just found a magazine and a book with his woodcuts and used him as my artist model. And his carving is amazing. And then in 2015 I had the opportunity to do a workshop with him. And
Hmm.
in that workshop I learned so much. Like in 3 hours I learned more than I'd learned in like 3 years at high school. He's an amazing artist and an amazing teacher as well. And so that inspired me to kind of put a bit more focus into it. So then I started looking for a print studio that I could join, a print group, and then it just kind of evolved from there. I started to exhibit and group shows and be part of the local print council and print groups. And then I thought, well, I want to do a solo show, so I went part time at work so that I could focus on
Oh,
doing a
wow.
solo show.
Yeah.
And then and so that's kind of how it escalated. And then I thought, well, actually, why not just be a full-time artist? I was living in Sicily and I really missed having a print community. So I thought, why not go to
Hmm.
Florence and study, challenge myself with thinking in reverse? Why not do etching? And why not go to one of the places where etching originated from, in Florence? So I went there, and Florence was amazing because it really gave me the opportunity to really examine the history of print, which I hadn't. And up until then, I just done my prints for a love of doing printmaking for myself. But being in Florence gave me an appreciation for printmaking and the history of
Hmm.
printmaking, and also its importance in the history of art, and seeing how print had progressed and conceptually and what it has to say in contemporary culture. And so that's what then led me to do more research about printmaking here in New Zealand, and then really wanted to showcase what was happening here. And that's kind of what led to Printopia, really.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so was this at the Il Bisonte Foundation of Contemporary Art and Printmaking, and that's in Florence, yes?
Yes.
Because I had never heard of this place until I started to connect with you.
Mm.
I'm wondering if you could just speak to it a little bit, because
Mm.
I'm deep in printmaking's business and I had not heard of it, but it sounds like a pretty incredible place. So just maybe for people who are kind of intrigued by this connection, what is that place, and what did you do there, and all of that?
Yeah, well, because I was already living in Italy and I got my residency and I just love Sicily. And so I thought, I want to stay in Italy. So I did some research around to say, well, where's the best place to study traditional etching? And there was a place in Venice and there was a place in Florence. And I was kind of like weighing up between the two. And I was researching the two places. The other one is that very famous place in Venice. I forget the name of it. But researching more about Il Bisonte, I was like, that's the one, because the woman who found it, she was awesome. So the guy who runs it now is the nephew of the founder, and she worked in media, and she helped during World War II. She helped smuggle out German refugee, like Jewish people, and like my grandfather was a German Jewish refugee, so I kind of connected with that story. And she went to Scotland and learned lithography there. And came back to Italy and realized that there were all of these lithography presses not being used, because they were used by the army during World War II to make all these maps, and they're no longer in use. So what she did is she said, because we've got all the technology there and the knowledge of how to use it, teach me how to use it, and then I will bring in artists, local Italian artists, to then make editions. And that's how she started it off. And she was going quite well. And then there was this huge flood, the flood of 66, where the river rose up. And what happened is that there was this thin layer of film of oil that just covered everything. And so I don't know if you know about this big flood, but a lot of the artwork in Florence was destroyed, and it had volunteers coming from all over the world to help clean it up. And they had all these different fundraisers, and she managed to make connection with Henry Moore, because Henry Moore spent a lot of time in Tuscany because he loved using the marble there. And so she talked to Henry Moore and said, how about you come and make an edition? And he came, and they had a great relationship. And he then brought all these other international artists from around the world, like that Mexican artist Tomeo, and to do editions. So it really kind of became popular in that way, and it kind of really grew as not just kind of a place to kind of produce multiples, but then became more like an art center, foundation for printmaking and art. And so I just really love that story, that was an art center started by a strong woman.
Yeah.
A great story, and just super passionate. And so that's why I chose Firenze.
That's amazing. And then was this kind of coming to the end of your time there? Was this when you had that plan to try and do the studio hopping country to country that COVID kind of got in the way of a bit? And by a bit, I mean, sounds like totally.
Yeah, well, I thought, okay, I'm going to be a full-time artist, so I'm going to go first to Florence. I'm going to learn all of the different techniques, and then I'm going to go to different studios around the world. And I had this idea that I'd be like a technician, because that way I could kind of earn some money. And then I realized, a technician is just it's not me. I'm just not a perfectionist enough. I'm just, So, I mean, I didn't get a chance to even do that, but that's not I love teaching. I teach workshops, but I don't think I could be a technician. Not my thing. But anyway, that was my idea. And so every day I would like run in there and I would say, okay, what are you going to teach me today, Louise? So they had a technician, and that poor guy, I was like harassing him every day, like, okay, what are you going to teach me today? And he's like, okay, Ina, today we're going to learn how to like file down the zinc. Like, okay. No, what are we going to learn today? He's like, well, we're going to do aquatint. It's like, okay, what are we going to learn today? He's like, but how about you just edition that print? Today you need to teach me spit bite. But you haven't taught me yet the salt you've got to teach me this, you've got to teach me that.
Uh-huh.
So done.
Just like a little gremlin for print knowledge. Yeah.
Those horrible students. I mean, he was probably relieved when COVID happened and they had to close the studios. Like, thank God I don't have to deal with her anymore. No, I mean, he was lovely, but I just, maybe subconsciously, I knew that I had to just learn as much as possible. And I learned a lot in that 3 months before they had to close the studio, and I had to go back to New Zealand because of COVID. But it was great. So the idea was to teach us the traditional way of doing etching, from filing and sanding and all of that, so that we knew how it should be done properly, and then from there to push the boundaries. So we had all that technical support, and then we had a couple professors. Monica would come down from Milan, and she would, on a Friday, would go into the archives, and she would pull out these big portfolios of these beautiful collections of work from different artists who had been there in resident, visiting from around the world, these gigantic colored mezzo tints by this Japanese artist, and these beautiful etchings. So it was an amazing experience just to see that archive and see them up close, and really see how different artists have pushed and are pushing the boundaries of etching. And etching is as far as we got. We were meant to do then letterpress and this and that, but we didn't get there because of the pandemic. But yeah, it was really an amazing experience, and one I'm so grateful for.
Yeah. Do you think you ever would have left were it not for the pandemic? Would you be still studying and teaching or something in Italy now?
I tell you what, Miranda, people kept messaging. I kept getting these random messages from New Zealand, from people I didn't know very well, saying, "Are you okay, Ina? I heard that you're in the middle of the pandemic there." I'm like, "Oh," and I'd be like, "No, it's fine," because I literally would just run to the studio every day, work, run back, work. I didn't watch the news. I refused to turn the TV. So I had no idea about really the level of what was happening with the global pandemic. I was like, nah, they're just being over dramatic. Because I'd been living in Sicily, where they literally were very over dramatic about flus. Like, they'd bundle their kids in puffer jackets, like as soon as it got a little bit cold, and be like, you can't get the flu and you can't get a breeze. And so I was like, it's just drama. It's going to pass. I refused to go. And then I got a message from a friend saying, "Ina, do you know they're going to close all the borders? Every country is going to close their border." And I was like, what?
Yeah.
Then I had a panic attack, and I was like, okay. And I booked a ticket back to New Zealand, and I emailed the New Zealand embassy and said, "Are you going to evacuate people? I'm here if you want to evacuate me." And then I got a ticket, as I sorted, and then I emailed the lady and said, it's fine, I got a ticket. So she then emailed me back, the embassy lady in Rome, and said, "Ina, what ticket did you buy? Because there's not many tickets left out of Italy." And so I've booked one that stops off in Bangkok. She said, "They won't let you on that plane. You cannot transit there." And so then a panic attack again. I was like, okay. And she said, "Look, I'm going to help you. I'll help you find a ticket." So she found me a ticket, and she said, "Okay, I found your ticket. It's at 11 a.m. tomorrow, leaving from Rome."
Wow.
And I said, "Well, they've reduced the number of trains from Florence. I can't get there in time." She said, "Well, you're going to have to taxi down there." So I said, "Okay, well, I found a taxi. They're going to charge me like 500 euros to taxi down there." She said, "Oh, no, that's a rip-off. Oh, no. Let me see what I can arrange." So she called me back and said, "No, don't worry, Ina. I found Bruno. Bruno is our embassy driver. I'm going to send him up to pick you up at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning to take you down to the airport to get on that plane."
Gosh.
Because I think that was like the last flight out of the country. So at that point, my nerves were so shattered, because I was like, "Oh my God, am I even going to get out?" And so Bruno turns up. It's like a Bond movie, steps out of his car and he's wearing a black leather jacket. And I jump in the bag. We scoot off down there. There's no one on the motorway, so we just zoom right down to the airport. The airport was just apocalyptic. Like, so depressing. Like, literally, the woman who checked me in didn't even give me eye contact, just kind of grabbed my bag, chucked it in, jumped on the plane. I was like, okay, you can't relax yet. You can't relax yet because you're not there yet. Transited in Munich. In Munich, 10 minutes before I was to get on my plane in Munich, they called me to the counter and said, oh, we notice, Ina Arraoui, that this flight wasn't purchased with your credit card. We need proof that you purchased this ticket, so we're not going to let you on this plane. And I was like, luckily, I called my mum, and my mum still has a landline because I'd purchased it with her card. And luckily, my mum answered. She didn't answer the first time because it was 3 a.m. She answered the second time because it's a landline. So, must be something wrong. Answered the phone. I said, Mum, you've got 10 minutes to scan and email these 3 bits of proof. And luckily, she had it right there in the safe. Did it, and I was able to get on that plane.
Oh my gosh!
I came back to New Zealand absolutely just traumatized, and I did have a bit of PTS. Like every time there would be an emergency lockdown alert for about a year after, my whole body would just, when it heard that alert, my whole body would just start shaking. At the time, I was just like, I don't want to leave Italy. And then when I left, the funny thing is when I left Italy, I said to the people I was living with, I said, oh, that box of stuff is my stuff. I'm just going to leave it there, but I'll see you next month. I mean, I was so much in the world. So yeah, the answer to your question is I wouldn't have left if it wasn't the pandemic.
Yeah, that's, just you describing that just brings back so many memories of that time, and thinking about, particularly if you hadn't been following very closely, the shock of it all falling on you at once. It was shocking enough to those of us who had kind of been watching it. Like, I'd been, really funny. I don't spend any time on Twitter, but in like November 2019, I saw a random little tweet that said, hey, here's 5 news stories that people aren't covering. And one of them had to do with some kind of policy change at like Singapore, Netflix, and one of them had to do with this and that. I wasn't really paying attention. And one was, there's been a novel virus discovered in Wuhan. And so I had actually had it a little bit on my radar, I think even before other people, because I was just like, oh, that's interesting. And I'd remembered SARS and all of that. And it still was a shock. Speaking of you, on the last flight out of Rome, my husband was on one of the last flights back into Australia. He had gone home for his grandfather's funeral, and he was right before they shut down those borders. He was like one of the last 2-3 flights. And then he was on an interstate bus with one of the first COVID cases in Australia. Which, thank goodness, it was a woman who had masked, and she actually only spread it to maybe the 2 people next to her because she was a responsible citizen who I think just was masking. But so he ended up being fine. But we ended up in quarantine as some of the first people in Australia because he got this call from the Australian government saying, hey, mate, guess what? So just that early time and the international drama, and it's all in that space of just complete unknown. Nobody had living memory of a situation like this before, and no one had seen something like this in the age of air travel. Because if you look at the Spanish flu is the most recent hitherto global pandemic. So that's a remarkable story, but it brought you home to New Zealand.
And that's the problem. New Zealand's so far away. To get there it was really tricky, but luckily I made it, and I made it just before New Zealand kind of went into lockdown too. So I managed to get down to my parents' house in Nelson and did the whole first lockdown there, which was great.
Yeah, definitely. I would say preferable to, I guess I can just speak from my own experiences of having spent most all of the real deep, dark first 18 months of lockdowns away from home. I was in Australia and then I was in Bangkok. And so that distance when things are profoundly scary, the distance from family feels so much greater. But at least in my situation, both Australia and Thailand were doing so much better than the US in terms of coping that my family just was sort of like, well, you're definitely better off there. So just FaceTime us, which is probably what we'd be doing if I was home because we weren't quarantining together. So, but yeah, I definitely understand that. So it brought you back and kind of with this knowledge and this hero's journey that you had in Italy of learning and gathering and studying.
Mm.
And then so you were home in New Zealand, and at what point did the idea for Printopia first sort of pop up as an idea of something that you'd like to see in the world?
Well, I mean, as soon as I got, because even before I left here, I thought there needs to be an open access print studio here. It's insane. It needs to exist. And so even when I got back, I was thinking, well, what am I going to do now? Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? And just thinking, well, if I go to Auckland, there's like, where can I go and make? There's not even a studio that I can go and make my work in. And so I kind of thought, well, why don't I do some research about what other artists are doing and how they're doing it? And then I got this really cool opportunity to go to Wellington and be part of this team to put together an exhibition about Mexican food culture. Random.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I applied because I had planned to go to Oaxaca, Mexico. Of course, it's like a mecca of wood. And so I thought, oh, well, I was going to go to Mexico this year, but I can't. So I'll do this exhibition instead. That'll be fun. And so I went down there, and it was really cool. And it just made me realize, and during this time I kept doing interviews and writing articles and putting them on my website. And during this time after this, I thought, well, actually, you can do anything, whatever you want to do. And you want to showcase what these amazing artists are doing, and how can you best use your skill set to do that? And my skill set is event management and festivals. My background is in that. So in 2000, I went to live in California for 3 years. I didn't plan to go for 3 years, excuse me. I just planned to go for like 3 months to stay with my mom's family and get to know my grandma and my aunties. But ended up staying 3 years because I started volunteering for this African Caribbean Music and Cultural Festival in Mountain View, California. And I had such a great time that I ended up staying 3 years. And that festival, that's kind of what got me into events and festivals, because I just saw the power of art to bring people together and to really promote cultural diversity and connect people. So I thought, well, that's how I'd like to bring together the print community, is I'd like to have a festival. Festivals are fun. Like I thought I could have just a print fair or a symposium, but no, festivals are about fun. They're about bringing people together, about having so many events that I love that feeling of you can't do everything. And like every year in my survey, I ask what was the highlight, and what do you enjoy the most, and what could be improved. And there's always people who say, I couldn't do everything. And I was perfect. To me, that is a compliment. That is great, because you should get that feeling of like, oh, there's so much to do. So that's kind of what gave the idea to do. The idea kind of first popped up after I'd been in Wellington doing this big exhibition, which I did all the public programming for and did a lot of the interpretive design of the exhibition. And so I came back up to Auckland and went to my local arts centre and said, hey, I'd love to do a festival here. And I was really lucky because the director of that art centre was really supportive. They'd just got this huge big press, and they'd started doing like drop-in print Tuesdays in a Tuesday morning. So they said, yeah, that would be great. So I started planning it all, and then there was another lockdown, a big Auckland, literally Aucklanders couldn't leave Auckland for 4 months.
Wow.
And so I had this dilemma of, should I just cancel it or should I postpone it? Because they couldn't say when we're going to be out of this lockdown.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought, look, if I cancel it, I think that'll be it. I won't do it again. But I'd already done all the planning, and I was so excited about it because I'd done all these interviews with all these artists across the country. And I was like, I want to bring them all together. Like I already had people who were keen to come along and do workshops and talks and demos. And so I was like, okay, no, it's got to happen. And so what I did is I changed the venue to have more space to be able to have that social distancing. So the first one last year, everyone was wearing masks. With the photo, looking back at the photos, like everyone was wearing masks, everyone had to social distance. We were still in like the orange level or whatever it was called. So that was a huge challenge, but it happened, and there was this amazing buzz, and everyone was just so excited, and it was a beautiful sunny day. And you know, from my event management background, I know just to have that level of achievement in your first year is amazing. And people kept coming saying, "Wow, is this like the third year you're doing this event?" Oh, this is
Yeah.
the first year. And they're like, "Oh, it must be a big team of you doing it." I was like, "No, it's just me." Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it was so good. And I was like, okay, now I can envision this being even bigger and better next year without all the masks and everything. So I said, yeah, it's happening next year. And people say, oh, is it going to be biannual? I said, no, it's got to be every year.
Yeah. 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 And so that first year was 2021?
Well, I planned the first one to be in November 2021,
Okay.
but because of the lockdown, I had to postpone it till May 2022.
Okay.
So I decided to change the month rather than, because it can't be in the middle of winter or the middle of summer. So it kind of going to be spring. And then I realized actually first weekend of May works really, really well in terms of, because I want it to be as accessible as possible. And that's a time when high schools and tertiary institutes are able to kind of come and participate. They're not really busy with exams and tests and things like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then, so in terms of the programming and actually what happens during Printopia, tell us some facts. How many weeks is it? What can you do during it? What are some of your favorite bits that happen during the event?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first year, last year, was just one day because I
Mm-hmm.
needed to see what's going to happen, how people are going to respond to this. And so the idea was that the first festival day was all the free events, and then on the Sunday were the workshops, which were paid to kind of pay for the free stuff. The idea was just to break
Mm.
even. But this year, it's more kind of how I'd like it to keep rolling on every year. So this year is a 3-day event. So Friday night, we had the print fair with live printing, and that was open to the public, and we had some drinks and food stalls and some speeches. We had a print prize this year, and so we had a little award ceremony with our guest judge coming over from Australia, a guy called Mark Dustin. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you're in Australia, if you
I know Mark. Yeah. Mark's great. Yeah.
he came over and he gave out the awards, and that was really awesome because I want to bring in a lot of young people, and there were a lot of, because there were different categories. So I had a high school category, and a lot of those kids came with their families and were taking photos in front of their work and saying, it's the first time I've been able to show my work. And then they came back again on Saturday and Sunday. So that was really, really cool. Then on Saturday and Sunday, downstairs we had 3 rooms, all with print fair, and each room had its own live printing station. So one room was screen printing, another was relief printing, and the other one was letterpress. So we have this guy here who has one of those beautiful Albion presses that he's put on wheels.
Mm.
He can take it around different places. So that's downstairs. And then upstairs we had print talks and demos, and that's all free and open to the public. Then we also had workshops on Saturday and Sunday, and they were paid, and they were mainly targeted towards people who had no experience of printmaking, so that
Yeah.
anyone could do it, the idea of accessibility. But we did have a few that were a little bit more intermediate level as well. Yeah, so that's the general structure of the festival. That
Yeah.
used to work
And
well.
so
Yeah.
and what kind of a response did you get? Were people kind of saying things like, "Oh, I've never heard of anything like this before in my life. What is this new technology? Or was it more of a, I've always wanted to know about this, I'm so happy this is here? What did you find was the general response, sort of mixed with general sense of what people already knew about print before Printopia?
Yeah, well, that's what's great is I really wanted to challenge people's ideas about what was print, who does print.
Mm-hmm.
So we had people turn up who were like, "Oh, I'm just going to come and pick up a friend or just stay for like half an hour," but ended up saying 3 hours because, wow, there was a guy printing from a fish, and then there was this other guy like giving a talk about how art changed his life, and so it was really good in that, or it is great in that it does bring in people who might have a little bit of interest. Let's say they're a photographer and they're like, "Oh, I just want to check out what is this dry point printing on a 3D press," and then they go, "Oh, actually, that's quite interesting. I might give it a go." So I think, yeah, it definitely expanded a lot of people's perception about what is print. And this year, in the print fair, we had a lot of printmaking suppliers, and so people could then
Oh,
actually
great.
go and buy like a little kit, let's say to do a relief,
Mm-hmm.
or you know, jelly plate, or whatever it is that they wanted to do, or they'd come out of a workshop where they'd just been doing lino woodcut, and then they would come and then they could buy the carving tools and then buy a woodblock print and then have a go at printing one in the live printing. So yeah, I think
That sounds
mm,
wonderful.
I think for next
Yeah.
year I'd like to have more live printing because
Mm-hmm.
people who are just dropping in who didn't know anything about printmaking, I think that's a really great way to get people kind of hooked and curious and wanting to know more.
Yeah, I can definitely echo that from my recent experience with Print Santa Fe. And it wasn't even, I think, compared to what you're saying, not even as big of an undertaking. We didn't have as many artist talks or anything like that, but we had Ryan O'Malley and Full Court Press do a live woodblock t-shirt printing that's very portable that he drove over from Corpus Christi. And we set it up right at the entrance to the print fair. And it was just this great introduction for people who had maybe seen it in the paper, maybe weren't really sure what they were going to see. That really simple printmaking, almost in its most basic form, that's just a relief block that's inked and transferred. You can see it carved in real time. You can see it printed in real time. And it was such a foray for people to get excited about what they were seeing. And then they could go around and they could talk to other people, like the little Friends of Printmaking booth that does screen print, and say, "Are these wood blocks?" And while it might not be true, it's such a great pathway in to having that conversation about, like, no, these are screen prints. You know what? Like, so what is this and how this is different? And seeing prints made live, it just lights people up almost universally. I think you have to have a heart of stone if you don't get jazzed about seeing a, a t-shirt or a piece of fabric or a piece of paper or a block coming off a matrix.
Yeah.
It's just, what's wrong with you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we had this guy, he had these little bits of calico cloth and these little lino blocks, and people could choose which one they wanted and he'd print them. And yeah, you just see the look on these kids' faces, like when they lift up the calico and there's their
Uh-huh.
little print. And yeah, it's really, really cool. I
That's so great.
yeah.
So, what about 2024? I feel like maybe you've had a little bit of time to catch your breath from since 2023. And
Yes.
you spoke a little bit to what you want more of in terms of more printing, but we've got a pretty global audience. Random Hello Print Friend fact: our most, how would you put this? The city that listens to Hello Print Friend the most out of our 750,000 downloads in the last 4 years is Melbourne.
Really?
I
Well,
know.
well, they have some really cool open access print studios there, so I'm not so
Yeah.
surprised.
So I
Um,
was going to say, you definitely have listeners relatively close and then also globally. So if there's anything you want to shout out or make a call for anything, I mean, this is a great platform to do it on.
yeah, well, I really like the format that we had this year. So a really fun kind of opening night event on Friday with the print fair, and then on Saturday and Sunday having back-to-back talks and demos and workshops. and live printing. So if anybody would like to come to come to Auckland next year, please come in May. And if you'd like to, first weekend of May, which is the 3rd to 5th next year of May. And if they'd like to do a talk or a demo or do a workshop, please get in touch. My aim is the big vision of the festival is for Auckland to be one of the printmaking hubs in the country and in the Asia Pacific, particularly, and in the world globally. Starting off in the country, it's going pretty well. I think we're getting known now, but then I'd love to really connect more with the Asia Pacific in our own backyard. So I'd love to bring over some more international artists next year, especially from our kind of Pacific Rim would be great. So I'd be really interested if anyone's keen to come over and get in touch. Workshops it's all about accessibility. So workshops are kind of just tasters, just 3-hour kind of intro kind of workshops. So kind of a longer 3-day type workshop is probably not the format that we're going to go for yet, maybe in the future. But for now, I think this format's working quite well, and I think I'd like to stick with that for a little bit longer. So,
So I wonder if you could tell me your vision, or maybe what your ideal would be. You mentioned Printopia evolving into a community access studio in some way. And so what would that journey look like? Would it sort of be you get enough funds from it that you can open a building? What is how I love the idea of festival turned all around community access. How would you love to see that happen?
Well, I really need good funding to establish an open access print studio. Really, I would need central government funding or a philanthropist who would pretty much pay the rent for the first 3 years to get it off the ground, I think. And so what I'm doing at the moment is kind of putting together a business plan for that. And then I'm going to look for some possible venues. And then if I find the perfect place, then that's when I'll probably then go and pitch the idea to different fundings and on different funding platforms. And I guess Printopia is a way to kind of build up that audience and that support, so that when I do find that venue and I do find that funding, I can then say, I can get all those people on board to say, yes, we love what she's doing with Printopia. We know she can run an open access print studio. We support it, and we will be in there, So that's kind of how I imagine it to happen. And then the open access print studio will be like its own thing. I don't think it's going to be called Printopia. And then once we have a base here in Auckland, then I'm quite happy for Printopia to become like a franchise. Do Printopia Wellington, Printopia Wanaka, Printopia Melbourne. I mean, Printopia New York. So that, because to be honest, I don't need to run the open access print studio. I'm on the board, but I leave that for proper technician people. And as we discussed, I'm not a technician.
Yes.
I have a vision and I'm passionate. So I'm happy to be part of the board and do all the funding proposals and all of that. But then I'd love to go off and do my festival all around the country and around the world.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like an amazing vision, because I've just seen recently, almost congruently, my print festival was at the end of April. Yours is at the beginning. Just that power of seeing a room full of printmakers connecting with the public generally, and printmaking is, in positive and negative ways, very insular and close knit and really passionate. But when you see that connect with people, and you see people for the first time coming to understand what it is and why it's exciting, that's a real magic. That's and I think something really essential to the mediums continuing to thrive, because it is being shut down in university settings quite
Yeah.
enthusiastically.
Yeah.
And in part, that comes from the COVID pandemic, which has been a theme in this chat. But it's people see the equipment is big and complicated and dangerous and expensive, and you need a technician to keep it up and all this sort of thing. So it tends to go. And I know a lot of people in a lot of institutions that used the fact that it's a communal space and that we were in lockdown as that excuse that they wanted to end it. And so that question of how do people get to know printmaking if they're not experiencing it in
Mm,
university setting?
totally.
And the first person I ever interviewed on the podcast, Woon Jin Ho, who
Yeah.
is now doing a PhD in Bristol at the Center for Fine Print Research,
Mhm.
she and I asked her how she came to find printmaking. It was at a festival. She said she did a little lino cut as a kid,
There you
and
go.
that set this whole thing on the way. So it has a purpose, and it's effective. So yeah, I guess because their print festivals are magic, and we need more of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, both years, the biggest feedback was when I said, "What did you enjoy most about the festival?" What most people said was the buzz in the air. Everyone
Hmm.
loved it. Everyone was just so excited, and they said if you went there and you weren't a printmaker, you'd want to be one by the time you'd leave. And like everyone was just so friendly and warm and welcoming and excited, and it was that buzz. And so for me, that's definitely the aim of every festival, is to make sure that that buzz is there and that excitement.
Mm. Yeah. That's so good. Do you think that your background in cultural anthropology informs how you go at festival making?
Yeah, well, I think it's my upbringing.
Mm.
I grew up in a very tight knit community. Community was really important. We were very independent, and but you know, you kind of you need to connect with each other just to kind of survive. And I think the it definitely showed me the value of community. So I think that's probably why I'm interested in cultural anthropology too, because it's looking at human culture and the importance of diversity and community. And so I think definitely anthropology has influenced my whole approach to festivals and the power of bringing people together.
Mm.
And how new
Hmm.
cultures can how culture is something that's always evolving. It's something that it can never be dead, because the very nature of culture is a living organism that's constantly evolving and adapting. And I grew up. My mom was from California. My father was from London, and then like I was very aware about this idea of like migration and movement and having to create new cultures where you go. And I grew up in Fern Flat, which is very much a new culture, kind of that had risen in the 70s about going back to the land. And yeah, so I think the importance of community is something that goes back to my childhood, really.
Mm. Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I think it's such a hopeful and right note to end on, as we've kind of been reflecting through the arc of our conversation and the effects that the pandemic had and the isolation that it did have, is that not being able to gather together in any safe way is still so fresh in our minds. And I know that I am taking it for granted less when I can be somewhere and just move freely, breathe freely,
Mhm.
n- embrace people who I want to embrace, and without that fear. I mean, that being said, I got COVID at Print Santa Fe
Oh,
for the
really?
second. Yeah.
This year?
I
Yeah.
for the second time. It was my second time with it. Yeah. So it's still there, but it was my second time having it. I'm boosted, and it was quite mild. I spent a couple days on the sofa, and it was fine. And so, so not ideal, but certainly not without a presence in gathering anymore, that's for sure. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what are you looking forward to? What's on the horizon for you? I know you've got, of course, as soon as the fun is over from one annual festival, the fun begins for the next one, months and months out. But anything beyond that is kind of giving you life right now?
Yeah, well, I'm really looking forward to getting back to the studio. I haven't had much studio time in the last 3 or 4 months. So it's winter, so I think I'm just going to hibernate in my studio, which I'm really excited about. I've got a couple shows coming up. So there's one coming up in August at the Franklin Arts Centre, which is a group show called Women Beyond Politics, and it's going to be shown alongside a portfolio celebrating 130 years of women's suffrage. So that'll be a really interesting show, and it really fits with this idea that I've been working on at the moment to talk a bit more about my family history, and so that'll be really good. And I'm going to be working on that. And the other thing I'll be working on is there's a annual steamroller event happening in the far north called Printopalooza up in Whangarei, and that will be on the 28th of October. And so I'm carving a big block for that. Last year I started the block, but I didn't finish it because I couldn't go because the borders didn't open in time for me to go up there. So I'm just finishing off my block from last year, which is very satisfying to get that finished. And then I'm going to start on my new one for October this year and go up there and print that. And yeah, that's kind of what I'll be working on. And then in July, I'll be going down to Wellington for a conference for art teachers and teaching a printmaking workshop there. And it'll be a great way to just connect with other printmakers. And then after that, I'd like to go up to Wanganui, which has quite a cool print scene and a lot of great printmakers doing amazing things. So I'd like to go up there and meet some of them and maybe interview a few and write a little bit about what's happening there. Yeah, so that's on my...
That's wonderful.
Horizon.
Yeah, I feel like we didn't even get a chance to talk about your own practice or the interviews that you do. So we'll have to have you back on so we can talk a little bit about everything else that you do. We got completely sucked into the magic of Printopia in this particular chat. So I hope you'd consider coming back on another time so we can learn even more.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, absolutely.
That's wonderful. Well, where can people find you? Where can they see your artwork? Where can they read your interviews that you do with printmakers? Where can they see your writing? Where can they learn about Printopia?
Oh, wow. Printopia, you can go to our website, which is printopia.nz. We have an Instagram, Printopia_festival, and Facebook. For my work, my website is my name, inaarraoui.com, and my Instagram is the same. You can read, if you go to my website, inaarraoui.com, and click under Print Community, all the articles that I've written, they're organised under artist profiles and exhibitions and print studios that I've written about. So, yeah.
Wonderful. I'll put links to all of those in the show notes, and it's been really wonderful to connect, and I hope that we can meet each other in person sometime at some print event out there in the world. It would be wonderful.
Miranda, I wanted to come to your event in April, but it's too close to Printopia.
I know. What are we going to do? We're going to have to create some elbow room between our events.
Yes, but I was thinking I might come over to Print Austin, the Print X1 Print Austin next year, because early February is much more manageable for me. So
yeah, absolutely. Or have you been to, or do you know about the SGCI conferences here?
It's still quite close. That's April though, I think.
Yeah. Or March, April, but no, I understand that. Yeah, mid February is probably a little more breathing room for you for sure.
Right. No, I can't do April. I think SCGI is in April this.
Okay.
Yeah, because I had a look. I thought, oh, that'd be great. Oh, it's too close.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we will definitely stay in contact, and I'm just really looking forward to sharing your stories and what you're doing with the audience. So thank you again.
Thank you, Miranda, and you have a lovely afternoon.
If you like today's episode, we have a Patreon where you can help us keep the lights on and get bonus content. Like Shop Talk Shorts, where our editor, Timothy Pauschak, digs deep on materials, processes, and techniques with past guests. Also, if monetary support isn't in the cards right now, you can leave a review for us on your podcast listening app of choice, or buy something from one of our sponsors and tell them Hello Print Friend sent you. But as always, the very, very best thing you can do to support this podcast is by listening and sharing with your fellow print friends around the world. And that's our show for this week. Join me again next week. My guest will be Julia Lucy. We talk about her journey to printmaking after years as a special ed teacher, her passion for layering and collaging her prints, and what it means to decolonize your garden. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing by Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.